700 years ago, a signal was declared dead. No origin, no explanation, no reason to still exist. It was classified as data mortis, dead, irrelevant, erased, but it never stopped transmitting. Dead files don't change. Dead signals don't respond. But pilot Soria Kell saw something the system ignored. A file marked dead was still active. It has a heartbeat, and not randomly. It had been transmitting for 7 centuries. At first it looked like noise, compressed waveform data, random static. But when she ran a deeper scan, at least something impossible appeared. The signal had structure. Not just structure, but behavior. Every time she analyzed it, the signal changed. Her comm unit chirped. Then came the order. Stop this investigation. It's a dead file. But Soria didn't stop, because dead things don't react. And this one just did. The signal wasn't stable, it was adjusting. Slowly at first, then faster. Tiny changes in timing, milliseconds shifting, as if something out there was responding to her attention, not broadcasting, communicating. 47-minute intervals. Perfect, repeating, predictable, until she looked closer. Then it shifted, a fraction of a second, then another, and Soria understood something terrifying. It wasn't just sending a signal, it was watching for a response. Silence. Then, say again. Soria expanded the waveform to its full 700-year timeline, a compressed tapestry of noise that looked like a grey smear until she zoomed in on the last 50 years. The signal had not stopped. The archive had stopped listening. The probe had continued transmitting, faint, degraded but definitely present, for 6 centuries after the official classification, and the archive's automated ingest systems had dutifully logged each new packet, tagged it as supplemental to dead file, and filed it away without ever questioning why a dead signal was still arriving. The heartbeat she had found was not in the content of the transmission. It was in the intervals between packets. They had been random for the first 100 years. Then they had begun to converge on a repeating pattern. Then the pattern had started to shift in response to something that Soria could not identify, and the shifts had grown more frequent, more structured, until now, in the last 6 months, the packet intervals had become almost metronomic. "That's not possible," Velis said after she sent him the compressed summary. "Dead files don't update. The system is supposed to reject incoming data for dead classifications. It's not rejecting it. It's filing it as low-priority background noise and never telling anyone. The audit trail shows that the signal has been received continuously, every cycle, for 700 years. Someone turned off the alert. Someone made the system ignore it. And whoever did that left a ghost in the access log that doesn't have a name." She could hear Velis breathing, which meant he was looking at the same data and trying very hard to find a flaw in it. "You're saying the signal is responsive. I'm saying the intervals changed when our deep scan arrays came online 300 years ago. They changed again when the archive migrated to quantum index storage 200 years ago. They changed a third time when the Far Shores repository was built 50 years ago. Whatever is transmitting, it knows when we're looking at it, and it has adjusted its behavior every time our detection capability improved." "That's a conspiracy theory, Kell. You're describing a signal that has been actively monitoring human technological development for 7 centuries. "No," she said quietly. "I'm describing a signal that has been waiting." The words hung in the stale air of the observation pod, and Soria realized she had just crossed a line that would be hard to uncross. Pilots did not make claims like that without evidence, and she did not have evidence. She had a pattern of intervals that looked intentional, an audit trail with a hole in it, and a feeling that had kept her awake for 31 hours. But the pattern was real, the hole was real, and the feeling, which she had tried to dismiss as exhaustion-fueled paranoia, had sharpened into something harder, a certainty that the archive's perfection was a lie. She transmitted her full findings to Velis, knowing that protocol required him to escalate to the archive's security division if he found the discrepancy credible. Then she waited. The pod's life support hummed. The starfield outside was static, unchanging, indifferent. And somewhere in the dark between the galactic arms, A 700-year-old probe was still transmitting a distress call that no one was supposed to see. 47 minutes later, Velis returned with a new voice on the line. A woman named Commander Eris Dane, head of the Archive's Anomaly Resolution Unit, whose reputation preceded her. Dane had a talent for making problems disappear, not by solving them, but by reclassifying them into categories that did not require action. She had once dismissed a confirmed alien contact event as sensor crosstalk and buried the report so deep that 3 subsequent investigations had failed to find it. She was efficient, ruthless, and absolutely loyal to the institution she served. Pilot Kell, Dane said without preamble, you've submitted a report suggesting that a 700-year-old distress signal is not only active, but intelligent. Do you understand how that reads to someone who hasn't been awake for a day and a half? I understand that the Archive has a blind spot, and I found it. The Archive does not have blind spots. It has procedural classifications that exist to prevent exactly this kind of speculation. Data mortis means the signal has been analyzed, found lacking, and closed. You are not the first person to look at LF1478 Omega and see something that isn't there. You are just the first person in 200 years to waste this many processing cycles on it. Soria felt the heat rise in her chest, but she forced her voice flat. Then why does the access log show an unrecorded read event one day after the classification was stamped? If the signal was dead, why did someone open it? Dane's pause was so brief that Soria almost missed it. That's a known metadata artifact from the quantum migration. Some files exhibit timestamp drift when moved between storage architectures. It's been documented. It hasn't been documented, I checked. There's no advisory, no correction log, no notice to users. The Archive treats timestamp drift as impossible because the migration was designed to prevent it. So either the migration failed in a way that no one has ever recorded, or someone accessed that file without authorization, and the system covered it up. Another pause, longer this time. When Dane spoke again, her voice had lost its clinical edge and acquired something colder. What exactly are you hoping to find, Pilot Kell? Soria turned back to her display, where the waveform pulsed in slow, deliberate intervals. She had been asking herself that question for 31 hours, and the answer had changed repeatedly. At first, she had wanted to understand the anomaly. Then she had wanted to prove the Archive wrong. Then she had wanted to know if she was losing her mind. But now, looking at the pattern that had been waiting for 700 years, she knew what she wanted. I want to answer it, she said. Dane laughed. It was not a friendly sound. Answer a distress signal that's older than human interstellar civilization. With what? The probe is 700 years out of date. It probably doesn't even have functional power anymore. You're talking about transmitting to a ghost. The signal isn't coming from the probe. That's what I didn't understand at first. The last gaze was just a relay. Something else is transmitting through it. Something that has been using the probe's systems as a broadcast antenna for centuries, and the Archive has been collecting the transmissions and filing them as noise, because it never occurred to anyone to ask why the noise had a shape. Dane was silent for a long time. Soria could imagine her in the Archive's central command nexus, surrounded by screens and subordinate officers, trying to decide whether to dismiss a junior pilot as delusional or to admit that her perfect system had a crack in it. The silence stretched past the point of comfort, past the point of professional courtesy, and into something almost predatory. Then Dane said, "You're going to stop this investigation. You're going to close your query, return to your assigned salvage route, and never mention LF1478 Omega to anyone again. That is a direct order." Soria looked at the waveform, at the metronomic pulse of packet intervals that had waited 7 centuries for someone to notice, and she made a decision that would end her career if she was wrong and end something much larger if she was right. No. Excuse me? You heard me. I'm not stopping. I'm requesting a full reclassification review under Section 47 of the Naval Archive Code. That gives me 72 hours to present evidence that the original classification was in error, and it bars you from shutting down my access until the review is complete. Dane's voice dropped to a whisper. Do you have any idea what you're doing? Section 47 has been invoked 4 times in the last century. Every single time the petitioner was wrong, and every single time they never worked in this field again. Then I'll have good company. She ended the transmission before Dane could respond, which was a violation of protocol and also deeply satisfying. Then she turned back to the waveform and began the work she should have started hours ago, a full-spectrum reconstruction of the signal's content, not just its timing. The archive had analyzed the static and found nothing, but the archive had assumed that the static was the message. Soria had a different hypothesis. She thought the static was the carrier, and the message was hidden in the relationship between the static and the gaps between packets, a dual-layer encoding that would have been impossible to detect without first noticing the pattern in the intervals. She wrote a new analysis script, borrowing processing power from her salvage vessel's navigation computer and ignoring the cascade of low-priority warnings that flashed across her console. The script would take 6 hours to run, assuming the archive's security protocols didn't flag it as unauthorized activity and shut it down. She set an alert for the completion time, leaned back in her chair, and finally allowed herself to close her eyes. She did not sleep. She could not. Every time she tried, she saw the waveform folding into impossible shapes, and she heard the echo of her own voice saying the words that had changed everything. It has a heartbeat. 4 hours into the analysis, something changed. The alert came not from her script, but from the archive's automated broadcast monitoring system, which she had quietly patched into her feed without authorization. LF1478 Omega had just transmitted a new packet. That was not unusual. The signal had been transmitting continuously for 7 centuries. What was unusual was the timing. The previous packet had arrived 47 minutes ago. The one before that, 47 minutes before. The one before that, 47 minutes before. The signal had been running on a perfect 47-minute interval for the last 6 months, and Soria had assumed that the interval was fixed, a stable pattern that would continue unchanged until something disrupted it. But the new packet had arrived 46 minutes and 31 seconds after the previous one. The interval had changed, not by much, less than a second of difference, but a change that small was statistically impossible for a natural process and redundantly intentional for an artificial one. The signal had adjusted its timing by just under half a second, and Soria knew, with a certainty that bypassed logic and spoke directly to her gut, that the adjustment had been made in response to her analysis. She checked her script's activity log. 4 hours ago, when she had started the full-spectrum reconstruction, the signal had been running on a perfect 47-minute interval. 10 minutes after she began, the interval had shifted by a fraction of a second. 20 minutes after, another fraction. The shifts had continued accumulating slowly, each one too small to detect without precise measurement, but collectively adding up to a pattern that was unmistakable. The signal was speeding up, not accelerating linearly, but adjusting its timing in response to her queries, as if it was trying to match her processing speed, or as if it was trying to tell her something. She pulled up the sequence of interval shifts and plotted them as a time series. The result was not random. It was not periodic. It was structured in a way that she had seen before in the early days of human-machine interface research, when engineers had tried to teach computers to recognize human speech by analyzing the gaps between words. The intervals were not the message. The shifts in the intervals were the message. The signal was not transmitting data. It was transmitting rhythm, and the rhythm was changing in response to her presence. She ran a rapid correlation between the shift pattern and the content of her analysis script's queries. The match was not perfect. Nothing this old and this alien could be expected to follow human logic, but it was close enough to be undeniable. The signal was reading her queries. Not the content. The script was encrypted, and even if it wasn't, the signal had no way to decrypt it. But the timing of her queries, the gaps between her data requests, the rhythm of her investigation, the signal was mirroring that rhythm, reflecting it back at her with a delay that had been shrinking over the last 4 hours. The signal was learning to talk to her. Soria's hands were shaking as she opened a direct channel to the archive's long-range transmitter. She did not have authorization to transmit to LF1478 Omega. The probe was 700 light-years away, which meant any message she sent would take 7 centuries to arrive, which was absurd. But the signal was not coming from the probe. It was coming through the probe, from somewhere else, and the delay between her queries and the signal's responses had been shrinking too fast for conventional physics to explain. The signal was not bound by light speed. It was not bound by anything she understood. She typed a single word into the transmission buffer. "Hello?" Then she deleted it. Too human, too presumptuous, too much like assuming that the signal had consciousness in a way she could recognize. She tried again. "You are observed." Still wrong. She was treating the signal as a person, and it was not a person. It was a pattern, a 700-year-old persistence, a ghost in the archive's machinery that had learned to hide from automated systems and reveal itself only to human attention. The pilots who had come before her, the ones who had seen something in LF-1478 Omega and been dismissed, had probably felt the same pull. They had probably stayed awake too long, seen patterns that should not exist, and been told they were wrong. Maybe they had been wrong, maybe she was wrong. But the rhythm was changing, and the changes were not random, and she had 72 hours before Dane could shut her down. She left the transmission buffer empty and ran another analysis, this time focused not on the signal's content, but on the archive's own behavior. If the signal had been active for 7 centuries, and the archive had been collecting its transmissions the entire time, then the archive's classification of LF-1478 Omega as data mortis was not just wrong, it was actively deceptive. Someone had turned off the alerts. Someone had buried the access logs. Someone had decided that a 700-year-old distress signal was not worth investigating, and that decision had held for 6 centuries, across multiple generations of archive administrators, technological upgrades, and political regimes. That kind of consistency was not an accident, it was a policy, and policies were set by people. She searched the archive's personnel records for anyone who had worked on LF-1478 Omega before it was sealed. The list was short: 3 analysts, 1 senior archivist, and a security officer whose name had been redacted. The analysts and the archivist were all dead, their records unremarkable. The security officer had no name, no history, no assignment logs after the date of the classification. It was as if the person had been erased from the archive's memory, leaving behind only a shadow, a redaction block that the system had been programmed to ignore. Soria stared at the redaction for a long time. Then she ran a cross-reference against every other data mortis file in the archive. There were thousands of them, most from the early days of interstellar exploration, when humanity had cast a wide net and caught mostly noise. She looked for files that had been accessed after their classification. She looked for files with missing audit logs. She looked for files with the same redacted security officer attached to their review chain. She found 12. 12 distress signals, from 12 different probes and vessels, scattered across 1,000 light-years and 3 centuries of history. All classified as data mortis. All accessed after classification by an unnamed security officer. All still transmitting, their packets still being logged, their patterns still shifting in ways that the archive had never investigated. 12 signals that were not dead. 12 signals that were waiting. Soria's comm unit erupted with a priority override tone. Commander Dane's face appeared on the screen, her expression a mask of controlled fury. "Pilot Kell, you have violated 17 separate security protocols in the last 4 hours. Your access to the archive is revoked, effective immediately. A security team is en route to your location. You will surrender your equipment and submit to a cognitive evaluation. Do you understand?" Soria did not answer. She was looking at the 12 signals, at the pattern that connected them, at the thing that Dane was trying so hard to hide. The signals were not independent. They were nodes in a network, each one transmitting on a different frequency, each one hidden inside a different dead file, each one waiting for the same thing. And the thing they were waiting for was not a transmission or a response or a rescue. They were waiting for someone to notice that they were not alone. "Pilot Kell," Dane's voice was sharp enough to cut, "acknowledge the order." Soria turned to face the camera, and she made sure her expression showed nothing but calm. "Commander Dane, how many people have invoked Section 47 in the last century?" Dane blinked, thrown by the non sequitur. 4. What does that have to do with... How many of them were pilots? A pause. 3. And what happened to them? They were removed from duty. Psychiatric review. Loss of flight status in 2 cases. The third resigned before the review could be completed. Did any of them mention LF-1478 Omega? Dane's face went very still. The Section 47 petitions are sealed. I don't have access to their content. But you know the names. You know who they were. You know what they were investigating before they were removed. I know that they were wrong, just like you are wrong. And if you continue down this path, you will end up just like them, discredited, isolated, and forgotten. Soria smiled. It was not a happy smile. You're afraid. I am enforcing protocol. No, you're afraid. Because if I'm right, if there's even a chance that I'm right, then the archive has been lying for 6 centuries, and not just lying to the public, lying to itself. The system that was supposed to be perfect, the institution that was supposed to remember everything, forgot the most important thing of all. It forgot to ask why a dead signal kept transmitting. Dane's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in the conversation, she had nothing to say. Soria turned back to her display. The 12 signals were still there, still pulsing, still waiting. She opened a new analysis window and began writing a query that would test her most dangerous hypothesis yet, that the signals were not just waiting for attention, they were waiting for each other. And if they connected, if they were allowed to synchronize, something would happen that no one had seen in 700 years. The security team would arrive in 12 minutes. She had 12 minutes to prove that she was not crazy, or 12 minutes to prove that the archive's greatest failure was not a glitch, but a design. She worked faster. The rhythm of her keystrokes merged with the rhythm of the signal, and for a moment, just a moment, she felt the pattern click into place, not as data, but as understanding. The signals were not distress calls, they were lighthouses, beacons placed at the edge of human space, broadcasting a warning that had been misinterpreted as a plea, and the warning was simple. Something is coming. We tried to stop it. We failed. Do not make the same mistake. But that was not the whole truth. The whole truth was in the gaps between the packets, in the shifts that had been accumulating for 7 centuries, in the rhythm that had finally found someone willing to listen. The signals were not just broadcasting, they were counting down, and the countdown was almost over. Soria looked at the clock. 11 minutes until security arrived, 11 minutes to decide what to do with the truth she had uncovered. She could shut down the analysis, delete her findings, and pretend that she had never seen the pattern. She could cooperate with Dane, submit to the cognitive evaluation, and spend the rest of her life wondering what might have happened if she had been brave enough to keep going. Or she could transmit, not a message, not a query, just the one thing that the signals had been waiting for, confirmation that they had been heard. A single packet, timed to match the rhythm they had been teaching her, carrying no data except the simple fact of its existence. She opened the transmission channel. She set the timing to match the signal's current interval. She typed nothing into the content field, and she pressed the button that would send a 700-year-old conversation into its next phase. The transmission went out. The archive's automated systems logged it, flagged it, and filed it under unauthorized activity. The security team was 4 minutes away. And somewhere in the dark between the stars, 12 ancient beacons received the first human response in 7 centuries and began to change. The intervals shifted, not by fractions of a second this time, but by whole seconds, then minutes, then hours, as the signals synchronized with each other and with the tiny pulse that Soria had sent into the void. The pattern that emerged was not random, not periodic, not anything that the archive's analysis scripts had been designed to recognize. It was a waveform that folded through space and time, a shape that had no name in any human language, a question that had been waiting 700 years for an answer that was finally arriving. Soria watched the display and understood that she had just done something irreversible. She had not just answered a distress signal, she had woken something up. And the archive's greatest sin was not that it had classified the signal as dead. It was that it had known on some level that the signal was alive, and it had chosen to pretend otherwise. The security team arrived. Two officers in archive tactical gear, their faces hidden behind polarized visors, their hands resting on stun batons that they had not yet drawn. They did not speak. They did not need to. Their presence was the message. You are done. Soria stood up slowly, keeping her hands visible. I need to send a report to Naval Command. You need to come with us, one of the officers said. His voice was flat, professional, and utterly without sympathy. I have evidence of a systemic classification failure spanning 6 centuries. I have 12 active distress signals that have been deliberately suppressed. I have an access log with a ghost in it and a security officer who never existed. If you take me into custody without allowing me to file that report, you become complicit in whatever happens next. The officers exchanged a glance. Behind them, through the open hatch of the observation pod, Soria could see the lights of the archive's central nexus blinking in the darkness. Somewhere in that building, Commander Dane was watching, waiting, hoping that this would go away. It was not going to go away. The senior officer reached for his comm unit. Commander, the pilot is requesting a report to Naval Command. She's claiming... He stopped. The comm unit had gone dead. So had the lights in the pod. So had every screen, every display, every piece of electronics within line of sight. The sudden silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of the officers breathing and the distant hum of the archive's backup generators kicking in. Then the screens came back on all at once, displaying the same thing, the waveform. LF 1478 Omega's waveform, but not as Soria had seen it before. It had changed. The intervals had collapsed into a single continuous line, and the line was moving, not across the screen but through it, as if the waveform was no longer a representation of the signal, but the signal itself, reaching out from 700 light-years away to touch the archive that had tried to bury it. Soria heard herself laugh. It was a shaky, disbelieving sound, the laugh of someone who had just watched the universe break its own rules. It's not a distress signal, she said, more to herself than to the officers. It's a handshake. It's been trying to shake hands for 700 years, and we kept ignoring it because we thought it was dead. The waveform pulsed once, twice, 3 times. Then it resolved into something that was almost, but not quite language, a sequence of symbols that Soria did not recognize but somehow understood. The symbols were not a message, they were an introduction. And the name they spelled, in a syntax that predated human civilization, was not a name at all, but a description. We who wait at the edge of the dark. The archive's alarms began to blare. Not the local alarms, the global ones, the ones that signaled a system-wide integrity failure. Every data mortis file in the archive had just been accessed simultaneously, their contents streaming into the central processing core faster than the security protocols could block them. The 12 signals that Soria had found were not the only ones. There were hundreds, thousands, each one a beacon, each one waiting, each one now synchronized into a network that spanned the entire reach of human exploration. Commander Dane's voice erupted from every speaker in the pod, high and strained and stripped of all pretense of control. Pilot Kell, what did you do? Soria looked at the waveform, at the symbols that were not quite language, at the handshake that had taken 7 centuries to complete. She thought about the 3 pilots who had invoked Section 47 before her, the ones who had seen something in the signals and been dismissed as crazy. She thought about the security officer who had been erased from the archive's memory, the one who had known the truth and tried to hide it. She thought about the 700 years of silence, the 700 years of waiting, the 700 years of being classified as dead while still, somehow, persisting. And she answered Dane's question with the only truth that mattered anymore. I said hello. The waveform exploded across every screen in the archive, across every terminal, every display, every device connected to the network. It was no longer a pattern of intervals or a sequence of symbols. It was a question, asked in a language that every human in the archive could suddenly understand, as if the meaning had been waiting for the right moment to become clear. You are not alone. Neither are we. Will you help us? Soria did not have to answer. The question was not for her. It was for everyone. And the answer, the only answer that mattered, had already been given, not in words, but in the single act of noticing, the tiny rebellion of a pilot who refused to accept that a dead signal should stay dead. The archive would never be perfect again. The system would never be trusted the same way. And somewhere in the dark between the stars, the ones who had been waiting for 700 years finally heard a voice that was not their own. It said hello, and the waiting was over.